Welcome, everybody, to today's WebJam. David, Meerman, Scott, and Jeff Ernst will be talking about why and how to unleash your customer's voice. Then Jeff will show you some examples of new ways of doing this. We'll finish off with a question and answer session. Now let me turn it over to David.
Hey, it's David Meerman Scott here. I'm the author of 10 books, including the one I'm best known for, The New Rules of Marketing and PR, which has been translated into 29 different languages. And I've spent my entire career talking about how organizations can do better marketing. And one of my friends that I've spent a lot of time with along the way, Jeff Ernst, is here. We're going to be talking today about interesting ways to jumpstart marketing that a lot of organizations really aren't doing very much of. And if they are doing it, they're not doing it in an effective way. Jeff and I worked together for several years when I was on the board of directors of Cadient and Jeff was the vice president of marketing at Cadient. Then he moved on and was the vice president of marketing at Forrester, big high-profile job. And he's recently started his own business, and he's co-founder and CEO of Slap5. Jeff, how's it going?
Great, David. Thank you, and glad to be chatting with you today about this very important topic.
The topic is customer proof points and customer voice. And it's so important because what I've been talking about for a really long time is the idea of content. Content as great ways to do marketing. And so many organizations, when they think content, kind of get bogged down into the idea of product pitches. You know, they think, okay, I'm going to do content. I'm going to create a blog. I'm going to create a Twitter feed. I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing. And they end up being pretty egotistical about it. And that really doesn't work so well in this new environment. So, Jeff, you're doing some really cool stuff around that. Why don't you just sort of kick things off here and let us know a little bit about what a customer voice program is?
Sure. So let's talk about why you need this. As you said, people are kind of doing fits and starts around trying to do customer proof points with case studies and testimonials and things like that. But why is it so important to be doing this now? Well, as you know, it's all about trust. We live in this trust economy. Buyers today put so much more trust in what their peers and colleagues have to say than they'll ever put in your sales and marketing messages, unfortunately. And I know you've said a lot over the years, David, about all the emphasis people put on their products. Well, it's becoming, I really believe it's becoming more and more important now that companies inject the customer voice and use the actual words and stories and experiences of their customers to validate the claims that they've made and to earn that trust of customers. And that's really what I mean about what a customer voice program is. It's a way to formalize and organize and make it much more efficient and to operate a program where you're gathering the voice of your customers in a more surgical way, which I'll explain later, than people are doing today, but to basically knock down the biggest objections, fears, challenges, and obstacles that get presented at any stage of your marketing and sales funnel.
So when I go to Amazon, I'm totally looking at reviews, or if I want to go to a restaurant, I'm checking out Yelp and whatnot. I understand that aspect of customer voice because those things are actually written by customers. Is that the sort of idea that you're talking about here, or is it something different?
It's the same principle of how people put more trust in what their peers have to say, but we're taking it in a little bit of a different approach. And so if you think about the Amazon reviews or Yelp reviews or TripAdvisor, that's giving third-party objective validation, hopefully, although sometimes it's not always objective.
I've been able to figure out when it seems like it's real. It's hard, but can sort of find little clues to whether it's real or not, especially if you aggregate 50 or 100 reviews on a particular product. But sorry, I cut you off there.
No problem. But the goal here is to be much more authentic and genuine with the voice that you're bringing to bear, and as I said, to do it in a more surgical way. And probably the best way to explain why I've built this methodology and process for how we do it, and have built Slap5 as a technology platform to scale this, is to talk about my experiences at Forrester, where I built a customer voice program from scratch there and learned the lessons through trial and error on how to do it right. and or to arrive at the best practice way that I've got to do it now.
Yeah, that'd be really fascinating, because one of the things that's so interesting to me about Forrester is that Forrester has built the entire business on the idea of trust and the idea of reputation, because as an analyst firm and a firm that provides advisory services, all it is opinions of analysts and other experts, and without that trust, without that proof point, Forrester wouldn't have any clients. So it seems like you had a wonderful laboratory to be able to test out these ideas. I mean, you weren't testing them out. It was your job. That's what you were doing. I'd love to hear the experience.
I'll tell you a little bit about the program there, because I think that illuminates a lot of the thinking behind how people should scale their programs and make them more effective as they move forward. And so when I first took over as the VP of Marketing at Forrester, I took a look at what the team was doing, and they were doing a lot of great things around producing webinars and field events and email campaigns, getting a lot of prospects to show up and consume the free content and advice that made Forrester look smart. But what we were struggling with was getting these people that were consuming this free content to then become buyers and enter our sales pipeline. I like to say they would just take the free content and run. And so when I was looking at that, I say, well, what do we do about that? And I just couldn't do this more of the same. I knew I had to do something different if we were going to really impact the growth of the company. And so where I started is I did a buyer persona project. I've always been a big believer in buyer personas, and I had previously been an analyst at Forrester where I did a lot of buyer persona work for our clients. So I put my analyst hat back on and did a buyer's persona project. I interviewed about 18 buyers of research services and really dug into why they bought and why they didn't buy, what their objections were, what their doubts were, and what surfaced were 4 key personas, not organized by any way that the company had ever organized personas before or thought of their roles. And it wasn't by functional role, it was more by the problem or challenge that they have that they're looking for help with. And I'll just give you a good example. One of the personas is the decision validator. This is probably the best known persona for a company like Forrester or Gartner. This is the person, the executive who needs to make an important decision and wants that third-party validation from experts that help give them more confidence in making that decision. And oftentimes that decision is around a purchase of a technology, but it could also be around reorganizing their department or something like that. And so what was the biggest objection that I heard from those people? It would come out that, hey, I'm spending X hundreds of thousands of dollars with Gartner or some other analyst firm. Why do I need Forrester? And so what I did, to try to counter that objection, I said, how can I do that? I could try to give my sales reps more messaging when we're competing with that company, but we'd already given them ballot cards and other things to try to do that. So instead I said, I realized the only way I'm going to knock this down is to hear what customers have to say about this. And then I went and I interviewed about 8 or 9 of my customers that were buying from both firms, and I said, hey, just tell me what is the incremental value that you get from Forrester above and beyond what you get from Gartner or the other analyst firms you work with. Yep. And what I got from these people was pure gold.
Wow,
so you notice, David, I wasn't asking them to criticize anybody else.
No, of course not.
I was basically, just tell me about the incremental value. And I got one customer, this was a manufacturer of industrial equipment, that talked about how Forrester helped them really create a digital experience at all the different touch points for interacting with their dealer network, as well as the end buyers, the farmers and construction people that buy their tractors, and talked about how Forrester helped them understand that persona. And so
how can
that
you,
was pure gold.
And how can you take that content that somebody gives you and turn it into something that was useful by salespeople who are trying to close similar business?
I'll tell you what exactly I did. So when I asked these customers this question, I just recorded it as an audio file basically on the telephone, and then I created a landing page. I used a tool called Postwire, and I created this landing page where I put these little audio clips from 7 different customers that had given me these great stories about the value that they get from working with Forrester. And then I gave that to some of the sales reps that had told me that they were struggling to figure out how to differentiate from these other two of our biggest competitors. And when they started using that, when they would get that objection, that question that I just mentioned, or when they were out in a deal up against one of those competitors, they would pull that out and share that with the customer. And because before they did that, they would try to struggle to answer that question. They would say some of the things about our coverage area and where we focus that others don't, but the response from the buyer would be, well, Gartner says that too. Serious Decision says that too. That didn't make you different.
It strikes me that that's so much more valuable to have actual words and phrases that somebody actually said than what so many other marketers do, which is kind of make stuff up or sort of re-engineer something that was said to make it feel like a customer quote.
And it's so much more believable too, and because, as we said, I like to say that buyers want a crystal ball into what life is like working with you, and that's definitely what Forrester wanted to know. I mean, you're asking them to spend a good chunk of money for this intangible product,
yes.
And they want to know that they're going to be a hero as a result of that advice. And so I was really surfacing these stories about people that were made heroes by the advice and guidance that they had gotten from Forrester, and there are quite a few of them, so it wasn't a challenge surfacing the stories.
Tell me what the sort of metrics of success are. We marketers, I'm guilty of this too, we marketers love saying, oh, we made this great thing and a whole bunch of people looked at it. Well, that's wonderful, but did it move the needle? Do you have any metrics that suggest that the salespeople were happy with this content or they closed more deals as a result of it or anything like that?
Marketers have such little visibility today into the impact that all of the materials and content that they're creating actually have in the sales pipeline. In this particular case, I was doing this specifically to help a big roadblock in the sales pipeline. So the success metric was the average deal cycle time. How long does it take to close a deal? And so by bringing stories like this, we were able to accelerate deals. And we could see that in our Salesforce.com. You could see that stage movement of opportunities was quicker when people were exposed and seeing these stories. And also just the overall win rate. And so what would happen previously is when that objection would come up, that would often be the reason why the customer, the buyer, stopped engaging and then went dark. And so now you could actually see an improvement in the win rate. And so that was both evidenced by the data in Salesforce, which is the truth, and also by the anecdotal stories from the salespeople that attributed this to helping them close the deal faster.
That's awesome. Let's segue a little bit here. I've been involved with a number of different organizations, either ones that I've been a marketer in or ones that I've worked with or ones who have shared their marketing with me. And most of what they do to try to capture this kind of thing falls in these really traditional and I think really ineffective ways of trying to gather this sort of information, these sort of proof points and whatnot. Like, for example, and I'm sure you've seen these things as well, the typical customer case study, and I've seen hundreds of these things where a company will find a customer that's willing to be interviewed. They'll interview them. They won't even know what all the good stuff is for whatever reason. It all falls on the cutting room floor. And they end up writing a story that basically says, this company had a terrible problem, then we came in and we're the saviors, and now everybody's living happily ever after. And that number one, that's boring. Number two, that's not even the thing that's going to be the most helpful for salespeople. So I see that a lot. The other thing I see a lot are video interviews of customers. And again, it tends to not really be focused on things that are valuable for others that are evaluating a potential product or service to move the needle. It tends to be more sort of egocentric stroking of an organization. So what are you saying here that's different than the sorts of things that I'm seeing out there that have been done for decades?
It's a great question because I'm guilty as anybody. I've probably created over 100 of those boring case studies that have that traditional, the challenge, solution, the results, and the little happy quote in the sidebar. And because, as you know, salespeople are always asking for more of those. You could have 10, they want 50. You could have 100, they want 200. And so a lot of the marketing departments are just chasing their tail, trying to pump out more of those the old-fashioned way. But the real issue is that those don't help buyers. And so, let me just talk a little bit about, why they don't help buyers, and then, some of the specific problems with them. But, if you look at the buyer journey today, and as I said, I've done a lot of buyer persona work and journey work. Buyers, as they go through their buying process, they encounter specific questions, fears, or doubts, or objections, or other points that just sort of stop them in their tracks. Right. And before they're going to be comfortable moving to the next stage with you, they want that resolved. And so even though that nice company video or that customer testimonial video that gives us all goosebumps when we watch it, it might create that emotional reaction, that feel-good reaction, but it doesn't necessarily address those specific questions, fears, and doubts.
Oh, that's really interesting. I never really thought about that before, but you're right. I mean, I sort of experienced that myself. You might see a video and say, "Wow, that's really cool," but does that take you to the next step of the buying process? Huh. Very, very astute. Yeah, because I never really put those two things together.
In the video, I'm not saying you shouldn't do them, because if you've got the budget to do it, I mean, it's a great way to kick off a user conference is to show one of those customer videos with the music and professionally produced, and you're filming their factory floor or showing their product in use.
As long as you know where in the sales process or marketing process that belongs, and don't misuse it, because I see so many people who take a content asset that was designed for one thing, or maybe it wasn't designed for something in particular, but they use it at the wrong stage of the selling process. They're trying to use a piece of content that's designed to move somebody to the final process of choosing product A or product B, which is someone who's gone through the entire process over months. And many salespeople will give that content to somebody way up at the top of the sales process, and where it's absolutely ineffective.
They're also not taking into account that the sales rep should be finding out what is the biggest concern on the minds of their buyer right at this moment. And by just saying, okay, I've got a buyer that's in the financial services industry, let me just pull out my best financial services industry case study and send it to the buyer and cross my fingers and hope it influences them. That's a prayer. Most salespeople have never even read the case study, so they don't even know what the issues or use cases were for that particular customer. And so it's like throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping it sticks.
Right.
And so the approach that I learned through trial and error at Forrester was to be more surgical about it. You have to recognize that buyers do have these, I call them the QFDs, the questions, fears, and doubts. And you have to identify what those are and recognize that almost everything that ever comes up, a concern that a buyer has, can be best addressed by your best customers telling their stories about how they overcame the underlying issue. I mean, I don't think anybody can dispute that, especially anybody that's been in sales trying to overcome objections. There's so much more credibility when a customer telling their story that knocks down that objection is being shared with the prospect. You mentioned a couple of the tools like the classic case study.
Yes.
Another problem if you notice with the case studies is they all sound alike.
They sound like they're all written by the same person. There's like some guy in the
they are,
or some woman who specializes in writing case studies, and everyone goes to the same person. They all use the same words: best of breed, and innovative, and cutting edge, and it's nutty.
And the reason they're like that is because here's how we produce them. We beg our salespeople or our support people to say, hey, do you know any customers that are willing to do case studies? And then after a while, somebody raises their hand and says, yeah, I've got a customer willing to do it. So then we spend a month or two trying to get permission from that customer, and then we set up an interview. We hire the professional writer to go interview them, and then the professional writer goes off for a couple of weeks and writes up the narrative, the story, and then it tends to be told full of your marketing speak in the messages that you're trying to get across as a marketer versus talking about the customer's real experience. And then it goes back and forth for review, and a couple months has gone by. That's very expensive to produce, and the end result is a 3 or 4 page PDF, and buyers today don't want to read 3 to 4 page PDFs. They want that specific question answered.
The other thing that's really interesting to me is that, other than maybe you and Forrester, I've very rarely run across an organization that truly has a customer success program, a customer voice program. Most of my experience and working with other organizations, the experience in those organizations, is that this is not necessarily a big priority ongoing. What typically happens in my experience is that it becomes a very, very high priority every once in a while when somebody gets upset. Typically the vice president of sales, oh my God, we don't have any customer stories. We need some marketing. Get your ass on the customer stories. And then all of a sudden it's the fire drill of the month and everyone's focused on creating some. And then a few get created and then it kind of drops off. Or the company is having their annual user conference. Oh my God, we're having the annual users conference. Let's hire a video team, bring customers in and interview them. We'll create a series of videos. But it's not an ongoing program. It's not something that one or several people or the whole department is focused on a regular basis. How would you, if we're like looking at a marketing plan for the next year or the next quarter, whatever period of time makes sense, how would you go about making this an ongoing, important priority in your organization? What would the steps or what would the process look like?
That's sort of the crux of what we wanted to communicate to people today. I've identified 5 critical success factors, 5 real things that people should take into account as they're formulating their plans. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm talking to a lot of marketing and sales leaders in the last couple months that are very interested in what SLAP 5 is doing, but they're also in the process of trying to put their plans together for next year, thinking about, well, we know we need to get more customer stories out there. What should we do? Or we know that we don't have enough customer validation of our claims. What should we do? And so, as you said, not a lot of people have this sort of in a well-structured, organized program. It tends to be done very fragmented. And so you might have sales operations team is running a customer reference program, and they're overburdening a handful of customers and saving these references to the very end of the sales cycle. You might have the PR team is looking for people to talk to the media or talk to analysts. They might be running an advocacy program to get people to amplify their voice on social media. Then you have the marketing team trying to do more case studies. You have the events team trying to get people to speak at their conferences or go to their booths at the trade shows. So it's very fragmented. I call this the random acts of customer proof.
Yeah.
So what do you do about this? Well, so let's dig into a couple of the things that I really think people need to be taking into account as they plan for 2017. I would say the first one is to reorient your goals for these disparate activities, for why you think you need customer stories and proof points. Reframe these in terms of how you want to impact the business and specifically impacting revenue. Too often, the goals of the sales team, obviously the goals of the sales team is to close more deals, but a lot of times the goals of the team that creates case studies is just to produce more case studies. Then they don't really care about how effective they are or whether they're used or not. And it's a great opportunity for marketing and sales to work together, because what you really need to do as you're setting the goals for how you're going to impact the business is understand what are the objections, the perceptions, both false as well as valid perceptions, and what are the barriers that are slowing down buyers at all stages of the funnel, at the top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. And every company is encountering obstacles in their sales cycle. And this is where you should really be looking at these obstacles. Don't just create a case study because a customer said, yes, I'm willing to do one. Instead, look at where their biggest pain points are in your funnel and figure out how can the customer voice and customer validation be brought to bear to knock that down.
So that sounds like it's a typical journalist, before they interview a source, knows what they'd like that source to say more or less. You're hoping that they would either validate your thesis or they would, you sort of go at it from the perspective of what you want them to say. Whereas what I'm hearing you say is that most people, when they do customer case studies, they don't know what they want that customer to say, so they just randomly ask questions. So, gosh, what a different way to approach an interview with a customer for a potential customer story, to already know the specific aspect that you want to interview them on, and sort of what a general thought is that you'd like to get them to say. Wow, that's a pretty significant difference.
It is a significant difference, and this is what I mean by being more surgical about your customer proof points. Is that the reason you're being more surgical is because you're putting some thought into understanding what are those choke points in your funnel. I mean, I'm a big believer in buyer personas, but not everybody has made the investment in buyer personas. But even if you haven't made that investment, you can learn a ton. I was just on a call today with a company's sales team with 4 people from their sales team to really try to understand from them what are the biggest snags that they're hitting in their sales cycles and where the customer voice could be brought to bear. And whenever I have these discussions, even with sales teams, it starts off a little tough because they're talking about there's a lot of bravado, but once you dig in and start asking some really pointed questions, they start to open up and share more of the actual issues that they're struggling to overcome.
Right.
And if marketing wants to impact sales in any manner, the best thing you can do is to help the sales reps overcome the issues that they're struggling to overcome that are going to then advance deals.
So I think you already answered this question, but should this program live in marketing or sales or PR, or where should it live?
Well, so here's the thing, and so that actually brings us step 2, the second big thing that I wanted to cover, because the short answer is I think companies should consolidate the efforts around the customer voice with a single person or a single group, at least from an oversight and governance perspective.
Yes.
Even if the actual detailed activities are taking place in different parts of the company. But here's a step that I would recommend them do before they figure out how they and where they want to organize it. So this would be to take a look at your current customer proof point initiatives from 2 perspectives, from the deliverables themselves and the programs that generate these deliverables. So focus on the deliverables first. I mean, you need to take a look at what you're producing from these different teams and say, are they being used by sales? Are they being consumed by prospects? How helpful are they? Are they impacting sales opportunities? Do the things that are being created, do they speak to the questions, fears, and doubts that your buyers have? I really believe that if you can't answer those questions, you should stop those activities right now, because there's a lot of uncoordinated effort around, especially mid to large-sized companies, around these things that are often not producing any benefit.
Yeah.
So that's really assess the deliverables and then assess the programs themselves. Again, I said this is the random acts of customer proof with all these different groups reaching out. It helps you just to even inventory all the people that are asking the customer for feedback and for stories and testimonials and things like that. And you may be shocked by how many you find when you take that look. So Dave, let me just transition into my third big recommendation that people take into account right now, because it's so connected to what you were just talking about with where should this live. What I strongly recommend as an organizing principle is that companies should, once they've identified all these different random acts of testimony and advocacy and customer voice, they should really bring it together under a single, what I call a customer voice program. And that's what I called it at Forrester. That's what I'm calling it now when I recommend it to companies, because it is really all about capturing the customer voice and managing and organizing it and then delivering it where it needs to be. And it's not just for buyers, like new buyers. It can also be for existing customers, where you can use the customer voice to help your existing customers use more. And that was another big use case I had at Forrester. Is we knew that the more that a customer was reading the research and speaking to the analysts through the inquiries, the more likely they were to renew. And so we used customer stories within companies to capture the voice of customers talking about the experiences of the value they were getting out of Forrester, and then having those people share them with their colleagues in other parts of the company as a way to both cross-sell and upsell, while also just driving more usage from the people that are already seat holders so that they're going to be more likely to renew.
Right. Yeah.
So treat it like a more holistic customer voice program where you're coordinating all the outreach. In doing so, what I strongly recommend to people is that you think about it as a program that you're inviting the customer into. You're inviting the customer into this voice program. You're positioning it with the customer, and you're actually running it as a two-way, back-and-forth equal exchange of value between you and the customer, because you want the customer to get as much out of it as you are. And then the expectation of the customer is that Through this program, you're going to be gathering their feedback on an ongoing basis by periodically asking them questions. You're going to be using that feedback to both make them more successful, to make your product better, to make your service better. And also, you're going to be capturing their stories in a way that can make them look like heroes and capture their experiences.
What's really interesting to me about that is how different it is from the approach that so many companies do. So many companies look at this as a one-way transaction, that they're trying and they're begging their customers to please give us a testimonial, endorse our product. And it's interesting how when that is asked for, that people naturally, I would too, naturally get defensive and are more than likely to either say no, or if the customer says yes, then that customer's public relations department will then say no. So what I hear you saying here is that if you can build this around creating value for the customer as well, it's going to be a much easier ask than in the old days when you said, oh, please, would you give us an endorsement of our product? That was really hard.
Absolutely, and I learned this the hard way as well. And I'm guilty of running reference programs in my past. I was usually the guy running the reference programs and the advisory boards. Loved it. But it used to be, the old way of thinking about this is to offer incentives or rewards for customers to be references or provide testimonials. And I just don't think that is true advocacy. When you're rewarding somebody, when you're giving them a discount or a rebate or a T-shirt or whatever it may be, when you're giving people money or rewards for doing favors for you, that's not genuine advocacy. And even the behavioral scientists have proven that when you operate in that type of relationship with your customers, you condition them to just wait for the next reward to be offered before they're going to do anything. So that's not genuine and authentic. That's more of a mechanical transaction. That's why it really does have to be a two-way exchange of value, and that's what's going to cause your customers to want to participate. It's the power of reciprocity. It's the serotonin and oxytocin that gets released in the brain when you feel like a company is doing everything possible to make you successful. You're going to want to return the favor and help make the company successsple.
And I know some companies also offer rewards for the salespeople. If you're a salesperson, your customer does a testimonial, then you get a spiff of some sort, which I think if you follow your advice, that whole requirement goes away, and it makes it completely different from the salesperson's perspective of, oh, this isn't a chore to gather these things, but rather it's a privilege to be able to offer them.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I believe that your salespeople and your customer service or customer success people, they're the ones with the deepest personal relationships with your customers, so they're the best ones to surface the customers who have great insights to share and great stories to tell, and can also be the ones brokering the conversation and inviting them to participate in your voice program. So I absolutely support that. I think it's a best practice, and I've done this before, to recognize and thank the employees who are surfacing them. But the most important thing that you hit on was it's no longer a burden, because my experience has always been when I've tried to get customers to be a reference, and you ask the salespeople, hey, who can be a reference? What about Bank of XYZ? Could they be a reference? You know how you always get the excuse, oh, now is not a good time. We've got a contract negotiation going on with them. Or we have a customer support issue. Or there's a reorg going on and our champion has been moving to another department. So there's always that protectionism that happens, that sales or customer support doesn't want you talking to their customers. By treating it as a voice program, you overcome that objection, and especially when you couch the questions or prompts or the things that you're asking your customers to do to share their feedback, especially when that's coming from the person that customer has the trusted relationship with, whether that's your salesperson, whether that's the customer support person, or it might be an executive sponsor in your company.
Right. Cool. So sounds like that's a pretty good list of the things that I need to do to plan this program to make it an ongoing part of my marketing. Is there anything we missed there on the steps to get involved?
On my point number 4, which I want to make sure people take into account, is you really need to rethink the definition of the term testimonial or proof point, because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And just for sake of clarity of communication within your organization, you should define that term. Because some people use it just to being that quote, that happy quote that says, XYZ company rocks. I recommend them to anybody who, who's looking for this. A happy quote like that, that's useless. I mean, but we all love to get them. We all feel good when we get them. So don't think about it. And I learned this the hard way, by the way, at Forrester. Let me back up and tell you about that experience. When I was doing it at Forrester, I started off my voice program by asking people for endorsements and recommendations and testimonials. Mm-hmm. Can you say something good about this, say something good about that? But you know what? There would always be a reason why. I can't do that. My PR people won't let me do that. I've got legal restrictions, mm-hmm. or I'm just not comfortable saying that. But you know what? At the end of the day, that's not what buyers want anyway. They don't want that testimonial quote or even that recommendation, because what they're more interested in is, as I said, that crystal ball into what life is like as a customer. They want to hear your stories, good and bad, about your experience. Exactly. And so that's why my big recommendation is, as you're rethinking this, make sure you're asking your customers to share their experiences, their knowledge, and their feedback, not asking them for the endorsement or recommendation, because you're going to save yourself a whole bunch of frustration as well as resistance. And if you do it right and you ask them the questions and they know that you're going to share some of these experiences more publicly and you've gotten the right permission to do that, you do it in such a way that you're helping the customer build their profile and reputation within their companies and within their industries. And who doesn't want to do that? I'm working with companies in some industries right now that you would think would be their customers would have a hard time going public. One of them is the security software industry. I mean, you would think of all places, why would somebody that's bought security software want to let the bad guys know what they're using? But here's an industry where these people, they want to be thought leaders in their space, and so they're out there sharing experiences on threats that they've discovered and improving the overall community's response and ability to respond to new threats. So there's a whole sense of community there, and a whole pecking order of thought leaders in the security practitioner space. And so that would be my final recommendation there. Have customers share their experiences and knowledge and feedback, and don't go begging them for the self-serving testimonials, because you'll really realize that that's what buyers want anyway. They want that genuine. They want to know, how did you go about getting executive level support for this initiative? How did you reorganize your team to do this? What snags did you hit that you wish you had known about before you started? So those are the types of things that buyers really want to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next, I think we should show our audience some examples of what we're doing with SLAP 5 and give them some inspiration of how they can unleash the customer voice in 2017 using some innovative techniques. And then we'll open it up for some Q&A. But David, I just want to thank you for having this discussion with me and sharing your insights on this really important topic that I really believe companies need to make a very high priority in 2017, because there is no more important thing that a marketing team can do than to make their customers successful and then showcase the success that their customers are having, so that it drives deeper level of engagement and helps the company with the bottom line of acquiring new customers.
Absolutely, Jeff. There's no question about that. That's why I'm so excited about what you're doing. That's why I'm so excited about SLAP 5. I did not say it at the start of the call, but I've signed on Jeff's advisory board as a member of the advisory board. I'm going to be helping Jeff out on a regular basis as he's developing the company. So we've been speaking with Jeff Ernst, who's the co-founder and CEO of SLAP 5. I'm David Meerman Scott. Thanks so much for listening in.
And now, as we just switch over a little bit here, just want to show you some of the examples of what we've just been talking about. And as I mentioned, what we're doing at SLAP 5 here is we're helping people capture their customer voice, manage it, and organize it, and then deliver it to all the places where they need to be using the customer voice for validation and for earning trust. And as we dig into, there's a lot of real specific challenges that you can go after when you're taking this more surgical approach that we talked about. So you think about the challenge of web visitors that don't take action on your site. This is a great way to convert them and get them to, give them validation on your website that make them take the actions that you're trying to get. Maybe you've got leads that don't convert. Well, use the customer voice as part of your lead nurturing program to convert more of those marketing qualified leads into sales opportunities. And every company that I work with talks about how difficult it's getting to differentiate their offering. Well, why not have the customer talk about in their own voice how you're different and why those factors that make you different are important to them. Every sales guy knows about deals that stall or go dark and how hard that is. And, so this is a great way to try to wake up a customer that's gone dark on you by they don't want to hear your message. They want to hear what it is that other customers have done to be successful. And then we talked about overcoming objections, and we also talked about customers that are slow to adopt. So think about that customer use case where you can drive deeper customer engagement and usage by sharing what other customers have done and the value that they've gotten. And just to help you visualize this a little bit, here's just an example of how a couple of stories could be presented around the particular context of a question that buyers are going to be interested in. And let's say, for Slap 5's own purposes, and as we're talking about evangelizing why people should be creating a customer voice program, one of the things that they want to know is what do other experts think about, why is customer voice so important? So I'll just scroll down here. Here's a couple of cases now where we've got several people that are customers, advocates, and I can click on any one of these people. I can see their name. I can see what they had to say. If it was a little audio or video clip, I can actually see that or listen to it or watch the video. And now I'm getting that positive reinforcement and that validation that this is something that should be taken seriously and I should be putting more effort into it. Here's just a totally different view is let's say you want to reinvent the case study and now show a much more interactive view of a case study. Here's a case where one of our companies is looking to showcase what a customer has done, what types of applications and devices they're using the Skyhook location service for. So you can see how instead of being a case study where it just tells a story from start to finish in prose, we're diving right into those critical surgical issues or questions or fears or doubts that your buyers have, letting you interact and find them quickly as a buyer or a customer, scroll through and see what else they have to say, dig in and actually read that little bit of a story about what Tamoya had to say, and even tell the company how useful this was to your evaluation process or your customer adoption. So if you want to learn more about how to do this, please email me, or if you want to demo this and see more examples of visuals of what you can do, please email me at jeff@slap5.com. And at this point, we have a few minutes left, so I think David is I think I unmuted you again, David. Let me know.
I'm here.
And
I'm here.
We're here to take some Q&A. If anybody wants to ask some questions, just open up the little chat bubble that you'll see in the little bar at the top of your screen, and when that drops down, you find my name or David's name, and just start adding a chat message there.
Jeff, just while people are starting to do that, I assume the product itself has complete flexibility in terms of what it looks like on a customer's site. In other words, you can adapt the Slap 5 interface to a customer's look and feel, that sort of thing, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And that was that second example that I just showed, because when you showcase the customer voice, you do want it to be representative of your own brand and your colors, and make it look like people are interacting with you on your site or through one of your web or social properties. And so absolutely, that's a mandatory thing in today's world. And does that live as that lives kind of as a widget that then interfaces with an existing website that a client already has? Yeah, so let me just clarify that a little bit. And so these stories that we're capturing and organizing in Slap 5, they can be delivered in a number of ways. One is that they can be the entire customer section of your website if you want to surface these stories here to allow a place for people to click on your main nav and see a bunch of customer stories as proof. Or they can be individual widgets, as you said, David, that can be sprinkled around different parts of your website to provide customer proof and validation of claims you're making on that page or section of your site.
Awesome.
But then they can also be used and injected right into landing pages. Like if you use HubSpot or Eloqua or Marketo, you just inject these stories right into the landing page if you're trying to drive more conversion or response to your offers being made on your lead nurturing or email marketing or customer newsletters. And then, for salespeople, they can capture these things and just grab these unique URLs as standalone landing pages and then share those with prospects or buyers. And then we have this ability now to track who their sales rep are sharing it with and then notify the sales rep when the people that they're sharing it with are looking at it, in which stories they're looking at. So it's like a Trojan horse for the salesperson to see and share these stories and see who they're subsequently sharing it with and when it is that those people go in and look at them and which customer stories they're looking at on the particular screens you're sharing with them.
Awesome,
so
thanks.
Lots of different ways of doing that. So some of the questions, I got a question earlier. I think I may have addressed it when we were talking live, but somebody had asked, when you capture the stories, how do you know that the customer has given you permission to use it? And and so again, I'll talk about that in the context of SLAP 5 as well, because what we do is we capture permission and store the permission for each micro story that you capture from a customer. And let me tell you what I mean by that, because a micro story, instead of just one 5 or 10 minute video to be your customer story, well, the secret to what we're doing here is we're capturing these stories as micro stories, which are basically reusable assets, audio, video, and text clips that are single responses to a single prompt, and they can be assembled and reused in different combinations to target specific needs. And so the same actual story or response could be used in 5 different places, once on a customer journey placed a board to show what the life of that customer has been, one when you're overcoming a specific objection, and then maybe one when you're trying to showcase customers in a particular industry. But anyway, back to the permissions question. So that's pretty important, and so that's why, when you're capturing these stories from customers, we automatically ask them for what permission level do we have to use this, and we do that for each story because it might be that there's one piece of information or response that the customer gives you that they only want to share with the executives of your company because it's maybe constructive feedback to help you improve. But then there's another story they give you that they're willing to share with fellow customers, and then maybe there's a third story that they say, you know what, you can share this publicly on social media if you like. So we have that level of granularity where you tag and store and track what level of permissions that customer has given you so that you can honor that, because as we know, the quickest way to get somebody to not want to be part of your voice program is to miss or abuse their permissions and use a story that they didn't give you permission to use. So there's another question that we had here was, how can you use this as part of a land and expand strategy? Okay, so I understand that question. Land and expand. So I bet there's probably a lot of people on the phone that are software companies, software as a service, and I know a lot of them have land and expand strategies. We had this at Forrester as well. So I'll just give you that use case. For land and expand, let's say that you're working within one part of a company, and then you're trying to, that there's great opportunity in other divisions, other business units, other functional areas of the company to use your software or your product or your service. This is a great way to capture the successes that your champions are having, the people that are working with you today in that company, have them capture in their own voice what successes they're having, and then ask them to share that success and the stories with their colleagues that they think would be interested in it in other parts of their company, maybe other geographical regions or, as I said, other business units. And what better way for somebody to realize, hey, maybe I should check out this company's software as well, than to hear what their colleague across the ocean has discovered by working with that piece of software. So, land and expand, I know, is critical to a lot of business models for software as a service companies, and this is a great way to support that. So I don't think I see any more questions. Oh,
I see one from Mike.
A couple.
Yeah, I see one from Mike. How long does it take to get this up and running?
So great question for Mike. Yeah, how long does it take to get this up and running? Well, the program, what we advise to people, and I'm doing this with a bunch of companies right now, we call it the jump start, the customer voice jump start. And the best thing you can do is to get a few wins under your belt by proactively, identifying like the 1 or 2 or 3 biggest choke points or obstacles in your complete customer lifecycle where the customer voice could come to bear, and then surgically go after capturing some stories from customers that target and address the underlying issues of those choke points, and then create some of those boards and then capture them, start to use them to tackle those issues, because then you can get some immediate wins. And that's what I did at Forrester. When I put out that objection about what's the incremental value, when I asked about the incremental value that they get from Forrester above and beyond Gartner, and as I said, when I put that into the hands of the sales reps, that was such a huge win that every time subsequent ones came out, they were clamoring to get their hands on them. And so that's what I suggest that people do, and that can be done in a matter of a week or two, basically, of kind of just thinking through identifying what is that biggest choke point or obstacle, how can the customer voice come to bear, and which customers can we go to ask their stories to kind of seed that well. And that's one of the things. I do that. It make it sound easy to do. It's not that easy. It takes a little bit of skill set. It takes an understanding of your buyer journeys, and so I am always helping my customers do that, because that's probably the biggest value add. And what we do is we generate what we call this challenge voice matrix that kind of lists down one column, sort of the biggest challenges in your customer lifecycle, and then down the middle we talk about here's the insights that we could gather from customers to knock down this challenge, and then the third column is basically here's the different ways that we would present it and use it across our different channels to reach people to knock that down.
Hey Jeff, there's a question I'm seeing here that's coming from Kia, and it says, when capturing the customer voice, how do you go about choosing the types of questions to ask? Is there a standard set you start with? I'll let you answer the main part of that question, but I'd like to answer with my favorite question that I typically wait till the end when I'm interviewing a customer with. I'll ask them a series of questions, and then my final question is typically something like this. I say, if you were advising another person like you who had a similar challenge like yours, what would your advice be? And using that at the end of an interview in a very open-ended way after someone has already answered some other questions almost always yields the best answer of an entire interview, because I'm putting them in the shoes of someone like them and inviting them to provide their advice to somebody who was like them before they got started on the particular journey. And it really does yield wonderful results. But I'm interested to hear how you would answer that question too, Jeff.
Well, David, I think that's a fantastic universal question. I ask that question as well, and ironically, I do it at the end of my buyer persona interviews that I do when I'm helping a company really capture their buyer insights, and it does actually surface some of the best quotes when you do that. But to answer Kia's question, and welcome Kia, the way you choose that is. And this is like a complete 180 from how companies do case studies today and videos, where they just sort of, as I said, the customer is willing to do it and they tell the story and throw it out there. You start with what is that challenge that they're having. I'll give you a good example. Let's take security software. So a couple of companies I've been working with recently are dealing with this. There's the clients just are not aware of the urgency or the degree to which their networks or devices or endpoints are at risk, because they maybe don't know about all the advanced threats that are out there. So there's not enough urgency. And so what do? Now you start to frame that into a question to ask, and the question might be that you ask your existing customers something like, tell me what types of advanced threats are you now able to thwart and stop and intercept that you weren't able to do with your previous system or with your traditional antivirus or something like that. So you see how I know where Key is going, I think. There are a set of standard questions, and with SLAP 5 we have a template, a library of prompt questions basically that people can start from. But where you get the real meat is to ask those very surgical questions that are going to knock down that underlying issue. And oftentimes those aren't generic. Oftentimes they're very specific to your business and very specific to that issue that you're trying to overcome. And there's a little bit of art and science to it, but it's so important. So I see Brenda's question about how to do this with clients that are in regulated industries, typically cautious about participating in materials that will be made public. And that's a very good question. I love it, Brenda. Thank you. Because I'll be honest with you, in some highly regulated industries like investment banking customers or things like that, there may be no way that these people can even acknowledge that they even know you. But that's usually not the case. But to answer that question, I'll go back to what I was saying, in our conversation earlier, is that the most important way to attack this is to not these regulated industries. Most of the time, the regulations prevent them from acknowledging that they're to be providing any type of recommendation or endorsement or testimonial that would be a conflict of interest in that industry. So think investment banking. They're managing money. They're managing investments. They can't be talking about the fact that their company does business with people. Pharmaceuticals is another highly regulated industry because of all the medical records and things like that. And so I go back to saying this is where you ask them the types of questions that people might ordinarily share if they were participating in a customer community, because again, that's what buyers really want to know. How did you go about getting executive level support to move forward with this initiative? Think about any software category or any consulting that you're trying to sell. There's always a political sale that your champion has to make, and others that are considering working with you have to make that same political sale to their higher ups or executive team. And so if you can have customers answer questions like that, now you're circumventing the regulated industry issues because you're talking more about some knowledge or experience that this person has had, as opposed to having them talk about your product or why it's better or things like that. So Brenda, in those regulated industries, you might have some handcuffs. You might not be able to talk as much about some of what do you like about our product, or what were the top 3 reasons why you chose us, but you'll probably still be able to dig into their experiences and knowledge. Okay, so looking at a couple here. So Jacob asked, how do you source customers with interesting stories? That's a great question. So, and you may not always know this, but you know who does? Your salespeople, your customer success managers, your account managers. And so one great way to do this is, and this is a feature that we've built into SLAP 5 that my partner Tim Leonard is very responsible for, is that you can be opportunistic and capture some of the spontaneous testimony that comes up within companies. And so I'll give you an example. When your customer success people are on the phone with a customer and they're talking about an issue they had and how they overcame it, or they might be talking about some value that they got, that's a great time to have that customer success person capture that story from that customer, either on their behalf, and they can enter that right, or capture it right into SLAP 5, or they could basically just tell that customer, hey, I'm going to send you a little note or a little text message. Could you repeat that story and just talk into your phone and tell that story again that you just told me, because we'd love other people to hear it. So that's a great way to, a creative way to source additional customer stories, to learn about who has those stories. But then, the other thing too, this is where it's different from the traditional case study or reference program, if you think about your case studies or references or even your advocacy program, if you have one, you tend to be working with the top 3%, like the cream of the crop of your most ardent, loyal, diehard fans are the ones that do those things. When I talk about a customer voice program, I suggest that there's no reason to limit yourself to just that tip of the iceberg. You should be tapping into all your customers. And for example, Jacob, think about this. Well, what's the best time to capture feedback about the criteria that somebody used when they were evaluating solutions in your area, in your space? Well, it's right at the time that they've made the decision to buy from you. And they're probably happier than they're ever going to be as a customer right at that moment because they're still in their honeymoon phase and you've got your halo still hanging over your, over your head. So that's a great time to ask customers, what factors did you take into account when you were evaluating your options in this area? Because think about how valuable the answer to that question is to other buyers that are considering you, because they may not have bought what you have to offer ever before, and they maybe not know where to start.
Jeff, let me add one other thought here. I've gotten some of my best recent customer stories just by monitoring Twitter and finding out what people are saying when they reference one of my book titles, or they're at one of my speeches, or they tweet to me. And I'm actually, as soon as we get off this call, I'm going to have a telephone call with someone for just that purpose and gather their story so I can talk about what they do. The person's name on Twitter, his Twitter ID is Matt Risinger, which is Matt with two T's, Risinger. And what he said to me on Twitter, he said, DM Scott, that's my Twitter ID, DM Scott, can't thank you enough for your huge influence on my business. I've had 6 million views on YouTube this year because of your teaching, and he linked me to his YouTube channel. That's really pretty cool. So I could have said thank you very much and let that fly by, but what I did was say, wow, hey, I pinged him back, hit him up on DM, direct message on Twitter, and said, hey, can I have a quick 15-minute telephone call with you and talk more about your story and perhaps write it up on my blog? And he said, sure. So there's, customer stories are peeking out from all different places. In my case, I find many of them on Twitter as people talk about me, my books, or talk about me when I'm speaking on a stage.
That's such a great point, David. Thank you for mentioning that, because I should have mentioned it earlier as one of the places where you can publish the stories that you're capturing in Slap 5 is to social media, but it's also, as you said, a great place to harvest stories, identify people that are saying good things, because not only you could also capture what he said right there on Twitter and pull that in and maybe use Slap 5 just to ask his permission to use exactly what he put on Twitter, and following up with him and getting more detail from him, so you can do both.
And what's interesting is because it's on Twitter, it's public, and depending on your relationship with a customer or somebody, you don't necessarily need to get permission. You just recreate the tweet. It's out there. It's public. It's already in the public domain.
Exactly. Yep. And another place where that tends to happen is on some of these product review sites. And so a lot of companies now are trying really hard to get their customers to write reviews on their product review sites, and sometimes you have customers that you didn't even ask that actually go and do it, even while you're trying really hard. And so, but there could be some gold there. The questions that get asked there tend to be more generic, but to answer Jacob's question, that might be a good source to know, hey, somebody shared some feedback on G2 Crowd or the Gartner Peer Review site or Trust Radius, sites like that. I mean, they're very good for kind of that third-party product review. A lot of focus on the product and the differentiation and the features, and so that's a great way to then be triggered that, hey, that's another person that I might want to reach out to, because there might be some stories of above and beyond the product review that about their buying process or about their customer experience that you'd want to share. Okay. So I'm trying to think. I'm just looking at some of the questions. Are there any that we didn't hit on?
I think we got them all.
We did. All right. Well, why don't we do a wrap there? We're a little bit after the top of the hour. David, I want to thank you for having me and engaging in such a spirited conversation. And thank everybody for attending today. And again, if you want to reach out to me for any more information, it's jeff@slap5.com.
Or David at davidmeermanscott.com. Jeff, this has been really fun. I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot myself.
All right. Well, we'll have to do it again sometime. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.